Welcome to our introduction show to the online Sports Nutrition Summit Europe. I'm Nick Morgan, and together with Nikki Hancocks and Will Chu, we've got an exciting hour planned where we're going to talk all things sports nutrition and what it is you can expect from the 3 webinars we've got planned over the forthcoming weeks. And they are Performance and Recovery, the Gut Microbiome, and also a focus on brain with this particular focus on esports. Our aim is quite simple. We're really interested to look at how sports nutrition is changing and crucially, what are the key trends that have developed through 2021. With so many opportunities to target new and old consumers with new ingredients, new formats and new propositions, we ask the question, what does the future look like for sports nutrition? So bringing in Will and also Nikki, we're really interested to look at, as leading editors, what have you found interesting over the last few months and as 2020 has evolved in terms of the key trends that you think are impacting the market?
Well, thanks, Nick. I don't think, as leading editors, I don't think we could ignore what's been going on in the past 12 months, and particularly the rise of the pandemic, and it's how it's currently ongoing at the moment. And in a nutritional sense, we as editors have seen a boost, increased interest in immune supporting products and ingredients. And I say immune support rather than immune boosting or immune enhancing. This interest in ingredients such as vitamins, minerals, zinc has just really blown up in the past 12 months or so. As long as the pandemic keeps going, we're going to see this interest extend and evolve to other immune-related elements such as the microbiome, probiotics, and also the role of the gut-brain axis. So as long as the pandemic is carrying on, we're going to see interest in all these subjects.
Let's hope it doesn't, by the way, for everyone watching.
I hope so.
But yes, I can imagine immunity has been such a big area. What do you think, Nikki? How do you think that's been evolving and linking into other areas?
Well, I mean, immunity's been massive, and it will carry on beyond the pandemic as well. Obviously, it's made people aware of how they can take it upon themselves to ensure that they're in a good place, both nutritionally and in terms of exercise, to make sure that they've got a good immune system. There was some recent research by MMR that we reported on, I think it was during the height of the pandemic. They'd spoken to around 5,000 consumers across the globe, and I think their research showed that immunity was either the top priority or the second highest priority for consumers around the globe. So that goes to show. Of course, another massive trend at the moment is personalisation. So there's been loads of interesting research in that area. I would say one of the most interesting recent studies was probably the PREDICT study. That was one of the biggest ongoing studies into people's postprandial metabolic responses to nutrition, and basically they found that people's own gut microbiome will have a massive impact on how they respond to different foods.
I think for myself as editors, I think there's been an increased interest in the just simply the ingredients and the nutrient quality in certain products, more so than ever before because of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Certainly for myself, I've seen many manufacturers, ingredient suppliers reach out on social media, freely giving interviews to myself and really just offered themselves up just to talk about the nutrient qualities, and also made an effort to disseminate guides and opinions, that use science as evidence for consumers, just to make educated purchases.
Yeah, true, definitely. Of course, another massive trend that we spoke about not long ago is the merging of sports nutrition and active nutrition, and the merging of sports nutrition into the mass market. Obviously, we always talk about how sports nutrition's moving into the mass market and how that's such a good thing, but then we were talking the other day about just how good it actually is that for the industry, or is it potentially a bit of a danger?
I think that's the fascinating thing to me, is just seeing how sports nutrition is evolving. I think so many people talk about sports nutrition evolving into a more active nutrition platform targeting a broader set of consumers. I've always been concerned slightly that therefore it's not sports nutrition anymore, and that will really challenge the original brands, the core brands, to actually be able to resonate and gain traction with these newer consumers who aren't quite so vehement in the amount that they exercise or the goals that they have for exercising. And that was a discussion we had, albeit through the lens of bars. I basically said I wasn't convinced that sports nutrition was so relevant anymore as a term. But ultimately, what I believe is that it's not sports nutrition that's going mainstream per se, but the principles of sports nutrition are relevant to so many more people. And that might be a subtle differentiation, but it is an important one in terms of building the right brands, propositions, and products that can obviously capture the imagination of this broader audience. And I think that's something that's fascinating to me that I'm sure we'll be discussing and unpicking across all three of the webinars and the rest of the session today. But of course, that's just my opinion. What's really important to us in this introduction show is to bring in the opinions and thoughts of experts within the industry, those almost inside the four walls. I was very lucky enough to talk to Gareth Stone, who's the MD of Houlihan Lokey, who I can't think of anyone better and more involved in the investment and acquisition side of the industry to provide comment on exactly how he sees the sports nutrition industry.
The overall nutrition market, as you say, I spend a lot of time in it, and I think overall it's a very exciting and attractive one, but we do need to kind of parse it down into some of the different areas that I think do have quite different dynamics. So the original kind of core sports nutrition, if you like, focused on bodybuilders, elite athletes, and heavy gym goers, we see it as more of a stable market. Of relatively small size, because there's only a relatively small number of people who are doing those type of activities. Whereas I think where a lot of growth and interest is coming, and also interest from the investment side, is where that then bleeds into a more mainstream audience. So we would probably describe that as more of the active nutrition side, functional food, protein enhanced beverages, and so on. And I think possibly the best way of illustrating how we see the difference between the two is between two businesses that we've sold in the last 12 months. So possibly the quintessential example of the straightforward sports nutrition business is Cytec, one of the pioneers, one of the largest businesses in Europe, that we sold a month or so ago to Biotech USA, one of its competitors. That business had been troubled for some time, no real growth, and very challenged profitability. So that type of market is not growing. Because the type of people who do that bodybuilding and very heavy gym growing, that there aren't a hugely increasing number of them, and profits very much hit because people like MyProtein have totally changed the market over recent years, and made it a lot more difficult for any people within the value chain to make significant margins unless you're fully integrated by having production and being a retailer as well. So that's kind of one archetype. The other archetype is the foodspring.com business in Germany that we sold to Mars last year. This is a business that at the end of the day, the largest single product group was whey protein powder in tubs, but it was very much a lifestyle nutrition functional food business that appealed to millennials, to people, yes, that might be active, but also people that just wanted a healthy lifestyle, healthier alternatives, healthy snacking products, more ready to eat, ready to drink, sold direct to consumer, and with a much greater, more mainstream appeal. And that was a business that had been growing very rapidly, had never made any positive profit, but was bought by Mars for a very high price in the hundreds of millions of euros. So I think that those two different areas exemplify the differences we see in what we would broadly call the nutrition market.
I think of two great examples, very relevant now. I mean, the Foodspring one is the one that people use a lot in terms of as a great case study of the new world of sports nutrition. Is there room for another Foodspring, by the way? Do you think there's more space, or do you think now that they've captured what they've done and they've had their multiple and they've moved on, do you think someone can recreate something similar, or are they going to have to find again another niche that will represent something that will resonate with with an active consumer?
Look, doing something new and different is always better. But there are absolutely always rooms for challengers in every industry. So you can see that on the traditional side, MyProtein is clearly the dominant player there, but you do still have other great brands focused on the protein powder side that are growing very quickly and doing very well. Thinking here of people like Bulk Powders in the UK, maybe ESN in Germany, and obviously a bunch of others. So it is possible to do well as a second mover, but there is a significant first mover advantage. So I would say that addressing new areas and new functionalities and new consumer groups with new propositions is probably going to be the way to grow the biggest most quickly, and therefore be the most attractive from an investment perspective.
It's really interesting. This brings us back to one of the biggest discussion points, which is actually the role of powder. I think you've also spoken already within the last few minutes and previously before about the interest in ready to eat, ready to consume, functional drinks and bars. Naturally, they get to more people. But FoodSpring, like you said, really the volume came from powders, but they offer a distinctive difference compared to core brands. But ESN's an interesting one as well, because probably their most vocal platform is their bars, and I think they've got their own manufacturing. So what's your view on powders? Can people still create a great brand and growth on powders, or will they always need something else in their range? Is there something that can still be achieved on powders?
Look, you cannot today build a business on powders alone, because there's not enough marginality in it. Although having powders, and thinking here primarily of whey-based powders, they can and should be a material part of the portfolio, because we all know that whey powder is a hugely useful component of anyone's diet, no matter the level of exercise or training that the one is doing. So can they play a great part? Absolutely. What you want to do, though, is avoid being in the commodified area. So if all you're doing is competing on price with MyProtein, the ability you have to make an interesting margin is very low, because those guys are very good and very efficient. Whereas if, like FoodSpring, you focus on the differentiation of your product and also the differentiation of your brand, then you have the ability to charge a premium over what MyProtein will charge their consumers, and therefore make a better margin. So it's all about differentiation, either of the product or of the brand, or both, ideally.
I think Gareth just nails it. I think he's got great examples of what the industry looks like today and how it compares to what it was in the past. I think he does a great job. He nails the part about the need for new functionality, new products and new propositions. People can't stand still anymore, and there's a need to add more, and that perhaps the original model that sports nutrition has been in the past is no longer relevant. It still has a role to play, but in terms of where the growth is, there's so many other areas that people now need to focus on if they're going to be sustainable in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he also exemplifies our point perfectly about the merging of sports nutrition into the mass market. The fact that he said that FoodSpring brought out the protein powder that was relevant to all consumers. He pointed out not even necessarily active consumers, just everyone. So yeah, it's just a perfect example again.
Gareth nicely talks about collagen. We discussed the brand about Vital Proteins, and what a great shining example that is of a recent acquisition that's taken place. And I think therein lies what Gareth's trying to get to the heart of, which is almost adding some form of differentiation to products. You have to add something more. It's products that have existed for quite some time. It's not necessarily new per se, but the way that they've wrapped it up, the way they communicate it, is really resonating with a new kind of consumer, and they're bringing some form of added value. And I think that links nicely to our next session, which is the first of our webinars, which is focused on performance and recovery, which is really getting into the heartland and the origins of what sports nutrition always was, the traditional core consumer, maybe a bodybuilder who's always had a focus on performance and recovery. But is that model still relevant? and how can people add value to an area, particularly in powders, where they can bring more growth to the industry. To help answer that question and try to get a sense of what people's views are on the future of performance and recovery in its core concepts, I caught up with Robert Walker ahead of his contribution to the webinar on performance and recovery to get his thoughts on exactly this topic.
Where the category was in a completely different place to where it is today. Everything was very much based on science, on building the credibility of the brand, based on the functionality and science behind the brand. Which is phenomenal for the core consumer, because it's like a kid in a candy store. The more information you get, the more data you get, the more credibility, the better you feel about a product. So brands such as Cymex, Optimum, USN were very much built on the credibility of the science behind the product. And that's still relevant today. It's still massively relevant today. I mean, of course, people want to feel that they're getting a credible, scientific-based product. But as the category grows, there are obviously new consumers that are less worried about the science, less worried about the detail, and want just an overview of what the product will bring them. And this new consumer that's looking more for lifestyle, as I mentioned earlier, their triggers for the product is quite different. Is it high protein? Is it low carb? Does it taste great? So their perception of what they're looking for from a brand is slightly different. So you can get an aspect where, as you would imagine, a brand can be too scientific for a general consumer. So it's how does a brand play that brand stretch, as you mentioned? How do they move between the requirement and necessity to have a science-based, credible formula for a core consumer and a great tasting, high protein formula for a general consumer? And so, as you say, that's really, really the challenge. And you can actually sometimes get stuck in the middle. You can try to sit on the fence and not be credible enough for the current consumer or the core consumer, and be too scientific for the general consumer.
I think Robert really summarizes nicely the challenge that brands have. He talks about the importance of science still to making good products, but obviously the need to communicate that effectively. And ultimately, the brands need to almost modernize approach if they are going to make these classical performance and recovery propositions relevant to not just the core, but to the active consumer. Will, what do you think about the relevance in performance and recovery products? Do you think they're still relevant both to the original and to the new consumer?
Well, it's a tricky one, Nick, because recovery has always been overlooked when compared to performance, and performance is a lot more tangible. It's a lot more valued, I'd say. And there's also the view that perhaps recovery is not quite as important as performance, but I believe that view is now changing, as the science attests to. And you can look at commercially, Premiership football teams like Man United and in Spain, Real Madrid, they also making recovery far more significant, more important, and they're tracking players' sleep. So, for example, they have installed sleep pods and they employ sleep coaches just to monitor players' sleep habits, their schedules. And as we've written so much on NutraIngredients, the protein, leucine, creatine, polyphenols, and omega-3 supplements, they're all used to enhance post-match recovery. And I'd like to add they also sometimes blended as well, just to add those added health benefits. But for me, they will remain of equal relevance as time goes on, and as science progresses, they'll find ways, recovery-wise, to prevent over-recovery, striking the balance between stress and recovery, and the development of specific recovery routines, which will almost always involve supplements and nutrition. Yeah,
no, I definitely agree. There's a move away from performance and more towards recovery, as I think more and more research comes out to show how we can use different nutrition to benefit our recovery, especially with botanicals. We've seen loads of research like that at the moment. I think something else to mention from the MMR research that I mentioned earlier, when it comes to immunity, it's helpful to also innovate with flavours and mouthfeel and smell to really create that feeling of providing a real immunity benefit. So perhaps we'll start to see sports nutrition products moving away from those sweet flavours like chocolate and more towards fresh flavours like lemon and orange, flavours that really make you feel like it's full of immune boosting ingredients. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the innovation keeps expanding in that area. I think really the winners as well will be the ones that can really connect with their consumers. So the ones that can do the really good qualitative research and find out what the consumers really want and just continue to innovate.
I think that point on innovation is a really important one. And to build on that, what we wanted to do is again get some more insider information and views on this to try and understand what that really looks like from those that have been there and done it before. So in contribution to the show, I spoke to Jason Rickaby, who's the ex-founder and CEO of PhD Nutrition, and he's got some great insight from having started the brand some 10 to 20 years ago and seen the navigation of sports nutrition over those years. And he has some great views on what the future looks like for the core sports nutrition market, and crucially, what might underpin the successful propositions moving forward.
Protein powder, there's still a growing market for consuming powdered protein as a functional and a beneficial, great nutritional product. The challenge is, you know, the elite sports consumer, I guess, who sports nutrition probably targeted back in the early day, more of a serious athlete, you know, has probably moved slightly away from an overconsumption of protein powder and probably moved into a slightly more reliant on food as a nutritional source. But protein per se, in terms of powdered foods, from a functional and health and lifestyle benefit, is definitely growing. It's just growing in a category that is probably more mainstream and is looking for a more holistic, more wider range of benefits, as opposed to just recovering from training or just recovering from sports or just building more muscle. It's now an entire lifestyle product. So that's why products like collagen and plant are growing. They're accessible, they're easy to understand, they're not targeted at bodybuilders per se. So protein powder is definitely growing, but probably in a more functional, mass consumer, wider array of benefits style. The sports nutrition model is confusing at best to even to people who've been in it a long time. The amount of products that are very, very similar and do very similar things. And that's just the way sports nutrition has evolved. Started with a core range, and then it's just built out and out and out and out. Whereas single-minded brands adjacent to sports nutrition that have been really clear and can then concentrate on one thing and one message, they're the brands that are winning.
So hypothetically, if you were to do it all over again, is that what you would do? Would you follow the same principle and have a single-minded branded proposition and build out from there now? Is that how you see the world working for the brands likely to be successful?
I don't think there's any room for another brand to do a traditional sports nutrition model. You look at brands like MyProtein and just the size they have got to, the range, the consumer database, the skill set, the ability, the model. Any brand now launching with a traditional, 8, 9, 10 range of protein powder, bars, fat burners, pre-workouts. It's so tough. It's so tough unless you've got an absolute standalone, unique proposition. So I would always, and I won't go back into sports nutrition because of that, but I think because it would be too tough. But any brand now looking to go into it, absolutely, just be really, really single-minded, really clear, small range, great product, unique, single-minded, target consumer, and just spend your time and effort really working on that single-mindedness.
Totally agree. One thing I love talking to you about is because every time we chat, you always inherently have an I remember doing this. I did this because of that. When I used to train, I wanted these products for me. There's always a huge empathy, because effectively you created a brand for you that you assumed and correctly therefore was relevant to others, because why wouldn't it be? Because you were the consumer in that message. As industries grow, as they become more mature, there's investment. Various people from big corporate come in, and I just wondered what your view is about that, whether there's a loss or a lack of the entrepreneurial spirit that's gone from core sports nutrition, and whether that's maybe contributed to a loss of identity a little bit.
I think there's definitely some of that. I think there's a big entrepreneurial insight required for sports nutrition and any adjacent category. It's such a relatively new category. We're talking probably 20 years really, and that's really new. And there's a real kind of badge of honor to being involved in this culture and community of training, using the products, eating in a disciplined way, understanding the mindset, understanding the community, having that insight into what the community want, how it thinks. And big business and corporates traditionally rely on data, and there's just no data. And the data that is here is just so unreliable and incorrect, largely because it's probably historically overlooked online. And online really is where sports nutrition grew. That's where it grew. That's where that kind of subculture grew from. The forums moved out from the forums to the gyms into social media, and now you're talking about a real kind of understanding and an empathy toward this consumer. And I always I founded PhD when I was 28, 29, and I created a brand for me because I just kind of figured that I met so many people like me that I knew if I created a brand that satisfied my needs, then I kind of figured it would resonate with this community that was growing at the time. And the challenge with trying to replicate this with data is it's just not there. And then you have a misinterpretation of data. You don't have the empathy, you don't have the emotional insight, you don't understand the consumer or what the consumer wants, and then you try and create products that just don't resonate. And then obviously you become disheartened, which is what's probably happened with a lot of traditional sports nutrition brands, and then they try and work out where to go next and end up following the trends. And again, they make mistakes following the trends because most of those trends are being jumped upon by entrepreneurial-minded individuals.
I love Jason's honesty. I love his passion, and I actually love his insight. I think he makes, for me, 4 great points. I think the first one is that powders need to have almost like a broader proposition. You can't just get away with the original performance and recovery of the past. You need to add a little bit more to it. I think secondly, the importance of having a single-minded proposition. So he talks so much about the diversification of ranges over the last few years, but actually now the brands that are winning are those that have a single-minded proposition. I think probably one of the most interesting points is empathy. He always talked so much about the I in there and what he did for the consumers, that he was one of them, and ensuring that brands have a really strong empathy in terms of connecting with the consumers is a core one. And then also finally, this is going to stay for me for a while, that ultimately he said he doesn't feel like there's room for any other brand to do the same sports nutritional model that's gone before them. And that's quite a big statement for people to listen to out there, and that really they're going to have to get on some sort of agenda here to work out what it is that's next. There was also some really clear themes there on collagen, which we're going to get some contributions to in the webinar that goes out on the 30th of September. It is a great area that we know can add value to powders and to this area in general. And to get that, we also asked Gareth Stone from our original interview what his thoughts were on the area of collagen, and this is what he had to say.
Personally, I'm convinced by the functionality benefits of collagen. And the very material benefits that you can get either specifically for training, but also very much more broadly for general health, particularly in terms of healthy aging. So I'm a huge believer in the functionality behind it. And Vital have done a fantastic job at branding it and at getting a premium price. I mean, that they've done that very, very well, as evidenced by their purchase by Nestle, who are very considered buyers of businesses. So yes, I see a lot of runway for collagen across multiple applications, that the easier you can make it to ingest, the better. I guess also the benefit of collagen is that you can only have relatively small amounts of it compared to your sort of standard 20 grams of whey protein and still be efficacious, which lends it to multiple applications. So yes, very bright future. Query, and this is an open query, whether you need a separate collagen branded business like Vital, or whether it can be very successfully incorporated as part of the product portfolio of an existing brand. But I think time will come, and that'll also depend on what entrepreneurs here in Europe do in terms of creating those type of brands. So look forward to seeing a lot of innovation in that area on the European side.
I think I, like Gareth, are really interested to see what the role of collagen is going to look like in the future, and particularly innovation. But what I think is really interesting about collagen is it demonstrates ingredients that offer so much more. And in some respects, collagen talks about almost the health of the athlete, keeping them healthy to perform. And that's not new to sports nutrition. It's something we're used to. If you're not healthy, you can't perform. And that concept within sports nutrition has been around for quite some time. Obviously, the key one that people talk about is immunity, and with that, vitamins and minerals. But one that feels like people are talking about a lot, which leads us into our second webinar, Nikki, is the gut and the gut microbiome.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like a massive, quite new trend, but obviously it's not new at all. The research has been going on for years. I was looking back for our archives ready for this, and I saw that we were actually writing in 2012 about a specific probiotic blend had been found to provide performance benefits to athletes specifically. So yeah, it's been moving into the sports nutrition industry for a long time, and the colleagues before us on NutraIngredients were saying this is going to be the next big thing in sports nutrition. So it's been going on for a while, but it feels like it's just really moving fast now and getting really trendy at the moment. And I think because there's so much really exciting research showing just how far afield its benefits can be felt. So we're starting to see research now showing that you know, it has improving the health of the gut microbiome has health benefits for the brain, so whether that be for sleep or focus, also for immunity, also even for increasing our ability to absorb nutrients. I actually spoke about Professor Philip Calder from the University of Southampton before we met for this event. So he talked to me a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of the science behind the microbiome, and I think he probably summarises it a little bit better than I can in this clip.
The microbiota have two other roles in terms of nutrient availability and nutrient absorption. So one is they promote the availability, so the bioavailability of some nutrients. For example, calcium is quite well described now, that microbiota actually promote calcium availability. Again, that seems to involve short-chain fatty acids, at least partly. So microbiota through short-chain fatty acids actually help calcium transport into the gut epithelial cells, make more calcium available to us. And they also upregulate the vitamin D receptor in gut epithelial cells, and that helps with the calcium uptake because of the way vitamin D works to make calcium available. So certainly microbiota or certain gut bacteria promote calcium absorption. That's a very well-known example. And then the other one is that some bacteria produce vitamins. So vitamin K, for example, vitamin B12, they're produced by gut microbiota. And vitamin K in particular, the microbiota is a really important source of vitamin K to us. Some bacteria also make folate. And in some people, microbiota can be a really important source of folate. So that's another way in which the microbiota is really helping us by producing vitamins that actually we use. Of course, the bacteria are using those as well. Then I think the other thing is the microbiota is also metabolizing many of the things that comes its way, and that can make those chemicals available to us. So good examples are some of the phytochemicals that come from fruits, vegetables, berries, and so on, these chemicals that give these things color. These generally have quite poor bioavailability in humans. Therefore, they make their way to the lower GI tract and they're metabolized by microorganisms to other chemical forms. And some of those chemical forms actually become available to us.
That was a great interview by Philip. Very knowledgeable and really good insights. What I think he's alluding to is how the microbiome, the gut, it's basically a second brain. That's where the basis of the gut-brain axis is. But my concern, my issue here is how the consumer understands that. Are brands, manufacturers, suppliers able to communicate that? The science is complex, to say the least. So I think a question to you, Nikki, is what does the market research tell us about the popularity of sports nutrition products with probiotic additions?
Well, Lumina Intelligence has done a lot of research on this recently, and actually it's really important, their research, because as Jason pointed out, it's really important to get research on the e-commerce side of things, and that's what they concentrate on. And their research recently showed only 2% of sports nutrition products that are sold online have probiotics in them, but they also found that those products with probiotics in also have a much higher engagement rate, so they get much more reviews, I think on average twice the number of reviews, and a much higher rating as well on average. So it's a huge untapped market for sports nutrition brands.
Well, I think manufacturers have responded in kind, with the rise of retailers, manufacturers such as Healthspan, Nutrizing, Raw Sport. Each all have their range of probiotic infused products. And just taking a look at some of the probiotics of choice, the majority of them, especially for sports nutrition, Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium, which science research suggests they support immunity, improve gut barrier strength, and lower oxidative stress. I think one of the advantages of probiotics is the ability to blend with other ingredients for added health benefits. So we're seeing a lot more products blended with multivitamins, omega-3, protein powder, just to get that all-encompassing benefit to the gut and to sports nutrition.
I'm definitely seeing it as well. I think the addition to powders, bars and drinks, I think the brands you mentioned are really good ones, are good examples. I think what we're seeing is that the probiotics has added an extra level to these products, almost like a premium layer. It's giving a little bit of a greater price point. Also some form of differentiation. Both Gareth and Jason mentioned the importance of differentiation innovation. So it makes complete sense that probiotics represents an opportunity to sports nutrition, not least because the science seems to be relatively robust. I guess the big thing now, Nikki, is how is this area going to evolve moving forward? What does the future look like for probiotics and the gut particularly?
Yeah, I think that at the moment, whilst we're seeing a lot of probiotics added to products to provide that digestibility element, we're going to start to see a lot more benefits starting to be claimed as the research progresses. So whether that be cognitive function, sleep, immunity, obviously, as we've mentioned, is going to be a huge one. A separate piece of research by Lumina, again, actually showed recently that the number of consumers who are searching for the terms probiotic and immunity has shot up during the pandemic. Yeah, I think another important area that's going to evolve is probably around plant-based protein. I think as people become more aware of how beneficial fibre and polyphenols are for the gut health, we're going to see a lot more innovation around that area. And then another big trend is going to be, again, personalisation. I think we'll start to see more innovations around personalised products and services that concentrate on people's individual gut microbiomes. And I actually spoke about personalisation with Mariette Abrahams, who runs her own personalised nutrition consultancy. She's a real expert in this field. So I spoke to her about where she thinks sports nutrition companies can change their services or their product ranges to provide more of a personalised service.
I think the lesson so far has been is that it doesn't need to be that complicated. And I think getting a very good understanding of what consumers want and in terms of their behaviors as well, using surveys is an easy way. It might not be as very, very scientific approach, but it's a very good way to get an understanding of what consumers' goals are, what are they already doing, what are their preferences, what is their literacy level, for example, their education level, and those are the kind of important things that companies can already start collecting to be able to personalize not only the products, on a bigger scale, but looking at the kind of information that can be provided to recommend the right type of product for the right type of individual. And as we can see, the sports nutrition area in particular has got so many customer personas that you can't have one marketing message for the whole group. And therefore understanding, whether it's gender, whether it's, exercise type, exercise, intensity, dietary preferences, those are all things that can be incorporated in a personalized approach. It doesn't necessarily need the most high-tech solution to be able to personalize. We know already, actually, that athletes' diets are not that different from the general population. So just by doing the basic research in terms of what kind of dietary pattern are you following, are you meeting the National Healthy Eating Guidelines? Those kind of things you can already then personalize with real foods, with dietary recommendations in terms of providing the right recommendations.
Mm. And you wrote a blog just recently about that this is a really good time to do digital surveys. Obviously, everyone's at home, everyone's in front of their computers. People are really interested in science and health. So it's actually a really great opportunity for companies to do that sort of investigation into their consumers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, people are so engaged now and so aware, and like I said, people want proof that products or ingredients or solutions actually will work for them. So they are much more likely to contribute to research or be interested in seeing what will happen moving down the road. But I definitely think that surveys are a great way and cost-effective way to get started in terms of collecting data.
I suppose as well with the fact that the scientific community is desperately searching for a vaccine, consumers have become aware of how important trials are for the health of the whole world. So I think again that will have encouraged people to get involved in these sorts of, even if it's just a survey,
exactly.
Getting involved and helping, improve the science around health.
Yeah. I think yes. No, so I was going to say. And having traditionally also reach hard to reach groups via online way is a very important way, because you don't necessarily have to live close to a academic sports science center to be able to contribute to research. This is now a new way where we can say, okay, you have the ability to contribute.
Yeah, so I think Mariette really, what she's putting across there is that it doesn't have to be that complicated to provide a personalised aspect to your business. It can actually be as simple as just doing a bit of market research.
And for me, I think that's also a really important point. It's almost on behalf of brands, personalisation and bringing in this area about the gut microbiome feels like it could just be a massive barrier to entry. It might cost too much, like the infrastructure, the digital nature, just maybe stopping people from moving this forward. I think what's really apparent to me is that personalisation is going to be an enabler to the category moving forward, particularly around education and meeting the needs of consumers. So the beauty about that is that people just need to get started. They can start simply, doesn't need to be too costly, and then with that build over time. And I kind of feel like that's going to generate the most sustainable, personalized models for brands moving forward.
Well, I take Marriott's point about it being cost effective, quite simple in the kinds of data that's been collected. But for me, perhaps a prediction for the future. Personalization, gut microbiome, I think they're two areas that have the potential to generate enormous amounts of data. And at this very moment in time, I think both areas are still in their infancy. And as Marriott points out, data collection to personalize or tailor sports nutrition products and services to individuals is limited now to basic information such as eating habits, food preferences and overall health. But I think looking towards the future, as science progresses and clients or consumers start to demand more, there may be a potential overload in this area. And I'm thinking maybe technology needs to advance as well to be able to process the hundreds of data and the mining needed to gain insights to tailor products and services that make personalization so successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely a subject that we're going to have to cover in the microbiome webinar. We'll definitely make sure we touch on that in the panel discussion at the end. So we've touched a little bit on the link between the gut and the brain, which is a huge area of research. But that's also going to be our third webinar in the sports nutrition series, which you're going to be leading, Will. So can you tell us a little bit more about that trend?
Yeah, certainly I'm leading that. I'm very excited about this emerging industry. I think products for brain health, such as nootropics, they really tap into that long-held belief that mental health is just as important as physical health for overall well-being and benefits such as healthy aging, which we spoke about earlier on just now. And with healthy aging, you know, the elderly are looking to maintain cognitive function through diet and nutrition, and same with the gamer industry. And I think the topic is worth going into some depth because of the opportunity it brings. And the rise of nootropics is one example, perhaps where the wealth of science available pairs up with increased consumer interest. So certainly in Europe, the drive has been led by firms such as Innovate, Applied Nutrition, and also the functional food and supplement brand Brain Effect. What's most interesting with nootropics is the recent range of product launches have used synthetic and semi-synthetic agents. But writing on NutraIngredients, I found consumers have expressed much more of an interest in natural plant-based ingredients such as ginseng, resveratrol, and green tea.
Yep, absolutely. I was going to say that it's those more natural nootropics that gives this area more appeal to the overall audience, so to the everyday consumer, not just your athletes, but people who are just looking to have a boost to get through their hectic lifestyle, to get through their 9-to-5 job, and then to get through their evening and their family life at home. So I think, yeah, since we've been seeing these innovations in the natural ingredients, that's when we've really started to see it have mass market appeal.
You mentioned mass market, and then, you know, just the ordinary consumer, busy family life, pressures at work. You know, this demographic is perhaps adjacent to sports nutrition as a sector, but no less interested in the sports nutrition products. I think perhaps the popularity of nootropics is nowhere more clearly shown than people who engage in esports. And we've seen professional sports clubs prioritise the game's nutritional demands as much as the skill needed to excel in this sector. Nick, I know you spoke to Gareth Stone about esports, its future, investment potential.
I think it's super interesting because you have a really dedicated bunch of consumers, you know, effectively Gen Z, not even millennials anymore, who really need the functionality that these products give them, and an increasing amount are being very cleverly formulated by increasingly attractive brands. So yes, but big believer in that idea. In a way, the products are not new. Nootropics have been around for a long time, but I think what we're seeing now is a confluence of a user group that need to use them, i.e. the emergence of the gamers, together with a bunch of brands that can speak to that community, and also that have good branding in themselves and good products. But people like Brain Effect, another great Berlin startup, are doing fantastic things in this area. So yes, we do see an awful lot of possibility in that area. Still very young, but yes, we do think it's a really exciting possibility.
So that interview with Gareth Stone, I'm really excited with the energy, the comments, the potential of the esports industry. I think at the moment it's such an emerging, brand new, adjacent sector to the sports nutrition. And you mentioned gamers, and they've looked at these botanical ingredients as a natural, safe aid to boost brain function, as well as sharpen reaction times, decision making, and enhance focus. So firms like UK-based Nubria, Berlin-based Runtime, they've already made formulations available, and these include ingredients such as cognicin, ginkgo biloba, and blueberry extract. Nick, I wanted to ask you, we recently wrote something on NutraIngredients about the deal between Nordavind and Body Lab. Could you perhaps summarise for us why that was so important in the esports industry?
I think this one is a really interesting article, very recent also. In the interview with Gareth, he alluded to whether it could be a gaming-only brand or to what impact sports nutrition brands might get into. It's all about the permission. And this deal particularly, what you see is Body Lab being almost a classical sports nutrition brand in Scandinavia, now getting involved in esports. Effectively, they've said, we've got a whole platform in sport, we want to go after the active consumer, and now they're recognizing that their products are relevant to the e-gaming community or the esports community, so how are they going to target that? The best way to do it is to get into the fabric of the sport, and they've done through sponsorship. Just as they would do in sport, they're doing it in esports. They've established a sponsorship. They gain insight directly from the athletes themselves. They provide products towards them. They build anecdotes. They build case studies. They build credibility. They build some sort of authority. And then in theory, they have permission to talk to the gaming or the esports community. That's what it represents. The fascinating thing is it's a sports nutrition brand making the move. Not the only one, not the first, but one of the early adopters, and that's going to give us some indication as to what extent the sports nutrition industry can truly link into this esports industry, which we know is interesting, already quite large, I think, but is going to move at some significant pace.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, I built on some of those issues that you've just discussed with Cohen Shobbers, and he is currently Vice Chair of the Global Esports Federation. He's an e-gamer, he's an e-athlete, he's a real pioneer of the sport.
Cohen, I'm just doing a bit of research around this subject. I'm noticing a lot of the startups, a lot of the investments, a lot of the product manufacturers, they have a very e-gamer or e-sport athlete background. I assume that's such an advantage that products designed by e-sport athletes are for e-sport athletes, so pretty much know exactly what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've been in the esports industry for a very long period of time, especially if you're an esports athlete, you're definitely like a couple of steps ahead compared with the company that has no know-how at all. Not only because of your knowledge of what an esports player needs, but also your network. You know, if you play on the highest level, you meet lots of people, you get a very big network, like I experienced myself as well, which eventually is very important for the business side and the trust that the industry has. But it's not very different to what I just mentioned, because in the end, an esports athlete is something that's been in the industry for a long time, spoke with many people, was active, and really, therefore, basically an esports athlete is someone that's interacting with the community through his followers base online, with the teams, with the managers, with coaches. And in time, that athlete is building a certain trust, like I can perform in a consistent way on this level for my team and win tournaments. If you're a very bad esports player and you go out of the industry because you're not good enough, it's of course more difficult to start a company and be more successful than when you are a successful player, therefore have a big network as well, and then launch a company. Now, the comparison with what I just mentioned with companies that are completely new, just interact with the community, show that you're there, get the feedback, and develop your product along the way. I think that you don't have per se a worse position to succeed than someone that has all that experience, because if you're going to communicate with the industry, we're a very open industry. Like, people can connect you with other people. We're very open to new sponsorships and parties that are interested, that really want to support the industry as a whole. So I think it can go very quick for a new company as well, trying to enter this industry, as long as they do it in the right way.
As the industry matures, we're starting to see consumers perhaps becoming more defined. So, for example, we have the professional gamer, and then we have the core amateur competitive gamer, as well as just the normal everyday gaming enthusiast. From a branding or product point of view, do you see maybe brands or products having to further differentiate themselves to cater to these definitions? So, for example, esports athletes, that they're looking for something produced that makes performance the focal point. So as esports is in its earlier days, do you see brands taking this route to help grow the market and drive innovation?
So I think at the beginning, a couple of years back, there's many companies producing something for like general audience. So they have like a certain product, push it into esports, but also casual gamers making use of it. I think there's so much potential for supplement, like companies producing any beverage or any drink that supplements the esports athlete eventually, because there's so many different niche, like esports already is a niche in gaming in general, but in the esports industry, there's many niches as well, because every game has their own communities. And besides the esports industry, like you mentioned, you also have gaming enthusiasts, you have casual gamers, you also have people that don't play games, but like to watch the games. And I think each of those niches eventually, if you know your audience as a company, you can kind of look for a certain niche that is comparable with the audience you're already having. So if you are if you're like a company producing supplements that are used for fitness, for example, I think it would be very beneficial to look more into like the esports athlete side of things, because they have their fitness coaches, they have their like nutritionists. So it's kind of the same area. If you already produce supplements for people to use when they're driving on the road, for example, to stay focused during long trips, or just doing computer work at their office and make sure they're focused at their jobs, I think then it's very interesting to target people that are more like casual players or the gaming enthusiasts, for example. So I think in general, the industry, of course, any company or any external industry other than esports gaming, like the food industry, can definitely help the esports industry grow, not only financially, but also the perspective that people are having of basically kids or teenagers or young adults earning their money playing games. Then again, food is so important, healthy food is important. And I think, again, the educational value that these companies can bring that are developing those products can be huge, not only for the people using it, but also for the parents of the gaming children, because eventually many kids turn to gaming in their teens, parents struggling. I know all about it because of my work. And if you can, as a company, also target the parent in some way or educate the parent about your product, eventually in a lot of cases, the parent is buying something for the kid. In younger years, it's the PlayStation that the parent buys for the younger kid. So if you can also educate the parent in some way, which is another niche, I think you're going to have a very big success. So it started general. Now we're going to see companies niching down in certain areas, and I think that's very beneficial for the industry in a whole.
So my thanks to Cohen for his interview, and the fact that he's so entrenched in the esports industry makes his views all the more valuable and insightful. If I could just turn to you, Nick. as someone who's also entrenched in the sports nutrition industry, are you able to comment on perhaps some of the products catered specifically for this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this industry, by the way. I think it's super interesting moving forward, and the challenge to the sports nutrition brands specifically. I've looked at this in depth in terms of the brands now that are actively engaged in esports and the products and the ranges that they're providing consumers. I mean, obviously what you'd expect is there's a lot of energy-based powders. So imagine a pre-workout sports nutrition, just reinvent it, and those powders themselves created for athletes by athletes is exactly what you're seeing out there. So high stimulant, caffeine, cognizin, products that you mentioned before. That's probably the number one product that the brand would lend itself to. Off the back of that, we're seeing capsules and tablets that are doing very much the same, but they're giving a broader nootropic almost platform. So you're not just seeing energy, but you're also seeing this cool kind of switch off, kind of rest. Can you sleep, on the assumption that people maybe are playing late into the evening or gaming late into the evening. So that's another area. Probably the really interesting fascination is the area around meal replacements. So one of the biggest seed investments is Runtime. You mentioned the brand earlier. They've had a significant investment in them as a brand. And then number one product is actually a meal replacement, which again is almost a product that is relevant to so many people for so many different reasons. It's fascinating that that in itself is a product that seems to be gaining a lot of traction with the esports community. So that's kind of as it stands at the moment, but like you say, there's lots of opportunities in other areas such as eye health, injuries, would you believe, with regards to gaming, and also maybe brain health long term as well, in terms of what that could look like.
So with NutraIngredients, we've written quite a few stories about the esports industry. One of the ones that I wanted to highlight was a report that talks about brain health, esports, as one of the primary sports nutrition drivers. And the report highlights e-athletes as emerging consumer targets who actively seek solutions for focus, attention, and enhanced reaction time. And we were seeing kind of like a physical, mental convergence. Some of the e-gamers starting to pay attention more to their diet, nutrition, exercise, the physical aspect of it. And one of the things that I point out in my article is the emergence of sponsors such as Coca-Cola, Red Bull, normally associated with high caffeine, high sugar drinks, which is a little unusual when you consider the demographic is looking towards more natural-based ingredients, more natural-based products. And I think I saw an opportunity in that article that talks about where brands, manufacturers could excel in this industry, with energy-enhancing products responsible for 30% of all launches, and recovery responsible for only 2% of all claims on performance-based launches. So this aspect of recovery, natural ingredients, is really something perhaps brands and manufacturers could really pay attention to.
So just thinking about some of the criticisms of the probiotic industry, what would be your response to critics who are saying that, you know, the research is still very immature and they can't really say that supplements will boost your brain performance? You'd be better off just concentrating on good nutrition, sleep and exercise.
Well, it's a similar argument to other innovative products such as probiotics, omega-3, collagen, even supplementation itself. My view is not to look so much about the science that points to one finding or another, but perhaps the quality of research, which seems to be getting higher all the time. Standards are getting higher in terms of things like sample size, methodology, and also the technology to gain those insights. Nootropics, brain health, esports, all relatively new industries. So I think we must look to the findings of sports nutrition, a much more established industry, and the advances they've made in applying certain ingredients to physical performance. We look to the lessons learned from sports nutrition. And I think my final point of this is that supplementation is not intended to be a one solution fixes all. In combination with diet, exercise and sleep, its benefits should work together, work in tandem, and is proven as an essential element in keeping the body and mind in optimal health. I wanted to move on to another article from NutraIngredients, and it's also esports related. And this talks about the rise of esports and the gaming supplements that are emerging in the video arena. A lot of it's about the education, both from sports nutrition manufacturers, producers, as well as the regulation behind it. The esports industry at the moment is worth around 244 million euros in Europe, with top prize money averaging 1.6 million euros. But with this lucrative industry, rewards come with a new responsibility, and the responsibility lies with the manufacturers, the people who make the products. One of the people that I spoke to was Runtime, and they commented that e-athletes look for a quick fix rather than a long-term regimen. And he thinks it's changing now. People are looking so much more about diet, nutrition, mental health, brain health, using education from manufacturers and the makers of the products. What we have to remember is with esports, it's the scene follows because it's so emerging. The scene follows trends. I think the main point of the article is manufacturers, creators of the products need to educate consumers what it is they do, what it is they don't, advice, it's all scientifically backed. So there's really a lot of work to be done. And one of the interviewees said everything starts from the top and trickles down. And also supplementation is a small piece, nutrition, but also fitness, sleep, hygiene, and of course mental health. So the education of e-athletes, e-gamers will form the cornerstone of our panel discussion.
Okay, so shall we finish up things by perhaps talking about our predictions for 2021? So I think I've already made a couple of mine quite obvious throughout. I think plant-based sports nutrition is going to be huge going forward, especially driven by interest in gut health. And a second one that I think is going to be a big trend is consumers researching for themselves the health benefits of different ingredients and getting more interested in the science behind the products that they're buying. I think this is going to start happening more and more with companies, nutritionists, researchers going onto social media and starting to put out some of the research in those little snippets of content that people find easier to read. And I think this is going to force companies in the industry to be a bit more transparent, and I think that's good for the industry and for consumers alike.
Well, for me, it's always the microbiome in sports nutrition, going from strength to strength. I believe deeper insights, as the science gets more advanced, as it evolves, we're going to see a more valuable role in prebiotics, probiotics, and its role in sporting performance, health. There's an ongoing issue at the moment in the nutrition industry about blends and dosages of certain strains. I think as time goes on, they'll become more specific. Perhaps this may be wishful thinking, but maybe even more personalised in the future. I think all these industries are all merging together. Those are my predictions. Yeah.
I totally agree. I think personalisation will be a big one moving forward. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think digital is the future, and I think it's an enabler to the category. Probably my biggest one actually is kind of reflecting back on the changing of the guard. I think we'll be discussing things to 2021 with different brands being at the top or at the forefront of who's leading the agenda. I think we've been so used to a traditional sense of brands. I think we're going to start seeing more and more newer brands entrench themselves, and as we discussed throughout the show, actually with a single-minded proposition. And I think fundamentally that's going to be a big prediction for 2021 for me, is a big shift in the changing the guard, and with that, exactly what is or what isn't sports nutrition. I think with that, Thanks everyone for contributing. It kind of almost brings us to the end of this introduction show. So we hope you've enjoyed it. There's been some great content throughout, which I think is valuable to everyone now, but it will also lead us to themes that we'll discuss throughout the following 3 webinars. So do check that out. If you haven't registered, please register for the next 3. You've still got time. And if you want to keep in touch with us, then absolutely continue to follow NutraIngredients, where we'll keep you updated with the news, the outputs and the opinions throughout the following series.